Welcome back to the Smartbuild implementation series. We are in part 15. So for this section, we will be going into settings and trusses. So instead of the setup wizard, trusses currently are managed in the truss section. So we go to settings, trusses, and when you first log on, if you're just doing a setup from start, you're going to have something that looks like this, where you have a few trusses in here just as examples. So again, you can use Smartbuild without setting up a truss catalog. It runs just fine. You just don't have a price, and you get a yellow price each time within the job. So we're going to talk about a couple different things. First, the catalog that we see here, the settings, and then all the factors that can affect, setting up this catalog. So when we go into a job and we talk about that in the roof framing section, so if we go into details and roof framing, we're skipping ahead a little bit to talk about these settings because these are all factors that we need to figure out and have set before we really start building out the truss catalog, because this is what builds the truss and determines if the truss is the correct truss for that job. So the best thing I could recommend is, when you're setting up your truss catalog, setting up your models, so you have a project, just a basic, maybe start out with a basic size of 30 by 40, and you have it framing the way that you want to frame. When you get to the point, okay, now let's add a trusses to our catalog, go into the roof framing, and first we're just going to consider flat trusses. So flat is the style that we're going to talk about first, and we're going to use wood as a material. And those are the trusses that you see in your index. So when we look at the index here, these are just flat wood trusses. So jumping back out, going into a start from scratch, we'll start there, open up a job. And the best way that I can recommend building out your truss catalog is actually in reverse. So you think about, okay, well, we can't build a building until we have the trusses in the database. Well, to know and learn how to build the truss catalog out, you can build a building first, and then that kind of gives you a clue on how the truss catalog should look. So if we look at this structure here, now look at my building size. This is a 60 by 80 structure and 412 pitch, pretty standard size. So with this, it has a 2-foot overhang. So I'm going to set my overhangs to none, and so that we don't have an overhang as a factor, one less factor that we're dealing with. So we have no overhang. Now jumping into the details, going to roof framing. So we have a flat truss and we have a wood, and we also have a 4-inch heel. So again, if you know what your 60-foot truss is, maybe it's a 8-inch heel. We're just going to change this. So if I set this to 8-inch, bottom chord pitch is not a factor since we're doing a flat truss, and PCT depth is not a factor since it's a flat truss. And then we have these choices here: use standard trusses for gables. Some companies choose to send out their trusses and not change the gable, make it all the same, so it's all commons all the way through. So you have that checkbox if you want to use that override. And then front gable flat and back gable flat, we'll get back to those. Those are related to scissor trusses, so don't need that right now. And then drop front gables with flush purlins. This is related to if you're doing a flush purlin and your purlins are dropped between. We can look at the style a little bit later. I'm just kind of covering all the settings as we're going through here. We can cover that style next. So it's not applying to our standard purlin on flat. So the truss spacing, again, another big factor. So if we're using a 4-foot spacing, you would set this. Now, the question is, okay, these are my standard trusses. This is a standard truss for me, and I've set these settings here. So how do I add a truss to the catalog with these settings? So I want to refresh my job here. So I'm sure that I have all my settings applied here. Now when I go to the job review and I look at this truss, it tells me that I need 19 commons and 2 gables, and it's a not exact match. So if I click on this orange icon, it tells me the truss that I need and then the truss that it found in my database. So it happens that one of my sample trusses in there were a 60-foot truss, but it didn't match up. So we'll just ignore it for a second, and we want to create a truss that matches here. Now we could jump into the truss catalog and try to figure out what all these settings are and try to figure it out that way. Instead, we're going to do this in reverse, and I'm just going to type in test 60, and I'm going to do the same on the description so we can find it really easily. So we have a test 60, and I'll just set the cost and price to 0. So this is a really good test. So we've set our settings here. We know what we need. Now we want to add this truss that it's trying to find. We're going to add one to the table, exactly like these settings. So the truss that it adds, it's going to build one to match our settings. And now, so we can see our test 60, it actually matched up. Now, if you were using use standard trusses for gables, like I'm doing here, I check the box, you'll see that it's fine. It has all perfect matches and our price at the top is okay. So if I uncheck this, it requires a gable truss, or it tries to find a gable truss. So we could do the same thing for the gable truss. We could select this orange icon here, and we could do a test 60. And I'll just put a G behind it for gable. Cost and price is 0, and I'm just going to add this to the truss table. Now this is the easiest way to figure out how trusses work in the catalog. So I've added these to the truss table. Now if I go to my home screen here and I go back into trusses, and I'm working in multiple tabs here so I can jump back and forth, you can see I have a test 60 and a test 60 gable here. Now when I look at these, again, these are the exact parameters that we needed for your style trusses. Now when I look at this, it does look like when you first create them, it just defaults them to black. Color is not really, with the standard trusses, color doesn't really matter. When we get into steel and parallel cord, that truss color does affect. But if you, just for peace of mind, you can set these to yellow pine, and it will keep everything uniform. So when we look at this, dimension 2 is where the peak is. The pitch 2 is just a standard 412. Overhang left and right with 0. Minimum spacing and loading and is gable. These are all just standard here. Now, when you look at all these settings, as you can tell, it's much easier to create a perfect match truss by doing it reverse. And some people, if they're only building out maybe, I want to say maybe 20 or 30 trusses, that's all they're going to put in here. And at least until you learn the process, you can just keep doing it this way. You can go to your main building, go to your building size. And again, this may not be for everyone, but if you're only adding a few trusses to the catalog, this is the easy way to figure it out. So you could set maybe a 24 as a standard truss for you. So you could put your width at 24 and then go into details again in roof framing and set the heel height. So what is your 24-foot truss? Maybe it's a 4-inch heel. All the other settings may be the same, maybe not changing. And you could do the same steps that we did before. You could put in a test 24. And again, you may choose to go ahead and put the actual SKU in here. I'm just doing a test 24 for this run, but you could choose to put the actual SKU and the actual price in here of your 24-foot truss, and then you're done. So when you add this to the truss table, you would do the same for the gable, repeat that process for the gable, and then when you go into your truss catalog, you're going to see those trusses show up here. So here's my test 24, and you can see the parameters that it needed to find a perfect match truss. So again, you can go through that process in reverse and just keep changing your job, your model, keep changing the model, changing the settings here, and then adding the truss to the table. And that's how you can build out a truss catalog fairly quickly. You know, it may take an hour or so to do a few sizes, but in a lot of cases, that's as far as customers are going. Now, if you're building out a more complex catalog, then you want to start looking at, okay, download this file, look at it in Excel, and just understand the data that Smartbuild needs. So we have had customers actually pull the data from their truss design software, maybe create a spreadsheet that kind of matches what Smartbuild needs. So if you're doing thousands of trusses, you could, if you could work in Excel, you could come in here and build those out. So if we look at this in Excel, you can see we have the SKU description, we have all these columns, and just considering what all is here, you could go ahead and build out your catalog this way. And again, the model itself can affect some of this data. So the bottom chord pitch, depth, left and right base, and the keystone width, those are all more advanced things. But just for the basic trusses, these steps here will cover you. Now moving on into other types of trusses. So if you're just doing wood trusses, maybe this process is enough and you're good here and you don't have to watch the rest of this video. So if you want to do steel trusses or maybe wood parallel cord or steel parallel cord, that's the next example we're going to look at. So when I go into my 3D view here and I have a 24-foot wide, I want to do a parallel cord. We'll start with parallel cord truss. It's pretty popular to do a steel parallel cord. Maybe it's a bar joist style truss. Again, the heel height, maybe it's a factor, maybe it isn't. But you'll notice that we get this gray look here, and it's just showing you that the truss is steel, but we don't have a perfect match. So with this being steel, I could adjust the parallel cord depth. Maybe it's 2 feet in height. And again, any other settings here may or may not matter to you. But the main thing is when you get this dialed in the way that you want, and wall thickness is also a factor with parallel cord. Since they get mounted to certain posts, they may have a certain mounting flange on them. So if you're doing a bigger post, that can also be a factor. So wall framing and the framing style. So you want to dial in your wall framing before you follow these steps. So again, going back into the job review, when I look at this, it's telling me I can't even find a steel truss at all, and for sure not with the 24 in steel in parallel cord. So again, follow these steps, click this icon. We could add a test 24, and I'm going to put steel behind it. Just leave the description the same, it's fine. And so here's what we're going to add. So when I add this to the truss table, you're going to notice something really changes in the 3D model. So if we go back to the 3D view and look at it, we actually have bar joist style trusses. And this is a nice visual if that is the style trusses that you sell. So if you set your trusses up this way, it is a nice feature that you have. And this could also be wood. So if you do parallel cord wood, it does show the webbing. So the webbing being shown in the trusses, it's kind of a topic I've reserved for the end of this video. There is a way that you can make it happen. But as of release 1.91 in the trusses, all the standard trusses do not show the webbing. It's just the way that Smartbuild currently works. So you get an orange triangle for your trusses. Maybe something we'll do in the future, but there is actually a way that you can get. So if you watch to the end of this video, you'll see how you can actually have webbing in all your trusses. So right now the webbing is only for parallel cord, wood or steel, black trusses, maybe brown wood. So this is a parallel cord. Now moving on into scissor trusses. Again, very similar steps. So when you set your truss special, set it to scissor, and maybe it's a steel, maybe it's wood. I'm changing it back to wood here. And then you can also control the bottom cord pitch. So if you're doing a 412 top, maybe it's a 212 bottom. And again, this is where front gable flat and back gable flat come in effect. So if you want to use a gable truss, so you want to have a flat bottom out on the edge on the front or back, you could do that. So this is where you're getting an actual flat truss for the gable, and it would figure a flat gable. So that's a flat gable, not a flat common, unless you use standard trusses for gables. So again, same step we just did. You could set all these settings here correctly and then go through that process and add those trusses. So I have one gable that's flat, one gable that's scissor, and then all my commons. So you can see how it organizes those out. When you're setting these trusses up, it is really nice if you would go ahead and set up your weight along with the price, because when it comes to shipping trusses, weight is obviously a big deal. So if you set up your weights, it is a factor. Now moving on, we have one other type of truss here. These would be attics. Again, currently we're not showing a room in the truss. It is something that we want to do soon. So when you're doing an attic, most likely, again, it's probably going to be a steeper pitch. So I'm going to set this to maybe a 812 pitch. So when you do an attic, again, maybe 812 pitch, and chances are if it's an attic, you're probably going to be doing something like 16-inch center or 2 foot on center. So I will set my truss spacing just to 2 foot here. So we have a lot more trusses here. So when you do an attic, again, it's not showing the room currently, something we want to do in the future, but the most important part, and we had companies that set up attic trusses. So when you're designing a barn dominium and your truss supplier and you've set up attic trusses, now the sales guys can, you can have all your common sizes in here, maybe 30s, 32s, 40s, all the common sizes that you use with the common pitches in your barn doors, where now the sales guys don't have to call the truss supplier to get a price just every time they're doing a custom truss like this. So the more time that you spend out building out this truss catalog, the more it's going to benefit you down the road, and all your sales guys and maybe even contractors bidding with your software. So again, the more time you spend, more benefits down the road. But with attics, the same case. You set your truss spacing, dial it in with these settings exactly the way you want, and then simply go into and add that. Now, Smartbuild automatically adds AT on the end of them here. Again, you don't have to go with our SKU. You can create your own. So I'll call this a test 24 attic and save that. Just add it to the truss table. And then that will automatically give it a truss here where it finds one. So that it's actually finding a truss. When I go into my index and refresh my truss list, you'll see my attic show up on here. So here's the 24 attic. And again, you can follow that process. It's very similar throughout. Now, one other thing that we didn't talk about, and this applies to all trusses. So when I'm designing a job in here, there is another factor. So along with, the style, the material, the spacing, the heel height, Smartbuild tries to find the closest match of the truss in your catalog in order to give you a price. The price at the top is always yellow if it's not a perfect match. So if I would go ahead and add these trusses to the catalog, then I would have a perfect match all the way through. So my price at the top would be a standard white and wouldn't be surrounded in orange. So doing that, and it's just a training thing with your salespeople, knowing that if this is orange at the top, I need to watch because I may have a truss that needs an adjustment added to it. So with the truss adjustment, you may choose not to add that truss to the catalog. You could just come into here and maybe add $20. I'm just putting $29 here per truss and add the truss adjustment. And it would look at how many trusses there were that needed that adjustment and just add a line item of 2. So when I look here, I have 2 of them at $29. It added an adjustment to these trusses here. So you can also add a truss adjustment. But getting back to, all your trusses that you set up, the other factor that we haven't considered yet is the loading. So when you're setting up Smartbuild and all the menus, you can add loading as a job question here if you want to quote multiple loadings, or if you want to have like a residential loading like 21, 10, 10, depending on where you're at. You can set up as many loadings as you want, and we don't really care what those loadings are as long as you understand what they are and as long as you have a truss catalog built out. So if you add loading here as a job question, and that's getting into the framing rule setup, we won't get into that here, but if you add loading here, then it adds a factor into your truss catalog that says loading. So we have loadings there now. If you notice that when you go into trusses, into this catalog here, there's a column that says loading. So if you choose not to set up loading, that just means all your buildings are one loading. You're just using one standard loading. You're not considering that as a factor. So another place where loading affects is span tables, and that's another topic in itself. But loading itself, if you're setting up loading, you have to have a truss catalog to support that. So if you choose to use different loadings, you have to go through this process for each loading that you want. You can't just have a single loading of trusses and then try to use multiple loadings in your jobs. So you need a truss catalog to support it. So that is a really quick rundown of building out a truss catalog, whether it's in Excel, whether it's just starting manual one at a time to try to figure it out. But again, we can help you upload. If you can build out a truss catalog, we can help you upload it. But these are the basic steps of how you understand the truss catalog and how to get to that point. Now, the last part of this video, we want to talk about our T.A.A.S interface. This is something available to anyone that uses a truss supplier using the Simpson truss design. So if you have access to a supplier that does that, we can kind of bypass all these steps that we've talked about, and you don't have to bother setting up a truss catalog at all. So you're thinking hey, that would be great if I wouldn't have to go through all these steps of building out and maintaining all these trusses. So what we've done, we have an interface with Simpson where if you have a supplier that's using Simpson, we can tie their truss pricing, which is on the cloud, to your designer. So I'm going to go over into a sample job here, and we'll look at how that would look if you're using the Simpson truss design interface. And we call that Truss as a Service. Shortened, it's called T.A.A.S. So when I go into a job and I'm using the T.A.A.S interface, now the workflow can drastically change. So if you choose not to set up a truss catalog and go through all this, and you're just going to call your supplier every time you design a different size building and add your trusses to the job, you can do that. But with T.A.A.S, it kind of changes your process. So with T.A.A.S in place, as you notice, we have flat bottom trusses here, and we actually have webbing. So it's a really nice feature to have, but it also is pricing these trusses automatically. So it doesn't matter what size, what pitch, what overhang size, whatever the customer's need is that walks through your door, you don't have to call your truss supplier and get a custom price. So an example would be here, if we type in, and again, the first time that I type in a size, it's going to create that truss and then it saves it for a certain amount of days. So if I would type in 27 feet on my building width, you'll notice that my trusses turn orange because it no longer has a truss that it can find. And that's okay. But as you're designing the job with the customer, T.A.A.S is working in the back end. So as I add openings, maybe I add a walk door, I'm talking to the customer, I'm working through this. As I'm making changes to the job, and sometimes it's less than even 60 seconds, it will already have trusses built out, designed, and brought back. And it just depends. It depends on your network speed and all that. But as you're talking to the customer, usually it takes at least a minute or two to figure out what they want. So, just as I was talking here, it communicated with the server and it designed these trusses and it brought these back. So you're probably wondering, well, why didn't it do it for the gable trusses? So what it did was it looked at your settings in this job, it figured out your heel height, and it built a truss according to that. So after this truss here comes in, it automatically sends this data back so it can start building the gable trusses. And again, another minute or two may need to go by. And by the time that you get done with your bid and you're ready to present it to the customer, you're going to have gable trusses coming in. So with gable trusses, the nice feature about that is it looks at your wall girts and it lines up the girt spacing with them. So the girt that it has built into the truss is actually considering with the building. So again, using T.A.A.S, your workflow can drastically change. When a job becomes an order, now your truss supplier can simply look at this job ID and he can pull these trusses up and maybe look at them, review them, maybe even optimize them a bit because it is an automated design service. So it may be something that needs to be optimized, fine tuning a bit, but something they're still working on improving as we go. But as you can tell, this can drastically save time no matter what the pitch is, no matter what the overhang size is, custom, whatever. Smartbuild would automatically design a truss for you and pull in a price based off of the parameters that your truss supplier had set up. So again, if you consider what we went through the first part of this video and all the work that would go into building out a truss catalog, basically you could skip all that. You could just hook up the T.A.A.S interface to your database. And with that set up, every job that you design, it builds out, it adds this truss to the catalog, and over time, it actually builds a truss catalog for you. If you choose, you can set it to where when a truss gets 30 days old, it has to regenerate. So after trusses get so old, it would recreate them each time, reprice them. So that is a really quick rundown of the T.A.A.S interface. We've also covered in this video, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at trusses. Hopefully this answers some questions. Maybe if you've seen a video showing the truss webbing and wondered how it got there, that's how you can accomplish that. So hope this helps everyone, and we'll see you next time.